So at the beginning of the 10th parak, what we find is a continuation of what had happened in the ninth. In the ninth parak was Ezra's prayer. Ezra had been overcome by the fact that the Jews who were in Eretz Yisrael had intermarried to an extreme extent, that they had not seen that prohibition. It began to create a situation of assimilation, which is something that was antithetical to everything they were trying to create. They were building the second Commonwealth, and this second Commonwealth couldn't possibly be built on an assimilated Jewish population. So he poured out his heart to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and in Perek Yud Pasuk Aleph, Ukishehit Palel Ezra, Ukishehit Vadoto, and when Ezra was davening, or at the time as Ezra was davening, and when he was saying his vidui, the confession, Bochel Mitnapel, he was crying, and he had fallen down Lifnei Beit Elokim, and at the Beit HaMikdash, Nikbetzu Elav Yisrael Kahal Rav Ma'od. A large population of people began to come around him from the Jews. Anashim v'nashim v'yiladim, men, women, and children. Kivachu ha'am harbe becha, because there were a lot of people who were joining him in his tears. The Malbim explains on this that this sight of Ezra's prayer and of his praying with such intense emotion was something that actually brought others to him. And in particular, when we talk about the women and the children, here we're talking about families where most likely, according to the Malbim, they had also suffered from the intermarriage. These were wives whose husbands had also taken non-Jewish wives, and they most likely had as well non-Jewish children within the family. And so this was an event where others came around him, and the tears were such because he had started. They then began to cry with him, and it was a real scene. Vaya'an Shechania ben Yechiel mibnei Elam vayomer leEzra. And Shechania now steps forward. Now, who exactly Shechania is, there's a number of different theories. We will see later in the parak that one of the families that sent away their non-Jewish wives was the family of Yechiel. And therefore, this person, Yechiel, this person, Shechania, may have been one of those who had intermarried. The Zevyavitz points out that this may be the same person as Shechania ben Yechaziel, who we had mentioned back in Perek Chet. But the Gemara in Sanhedrin actually views Shechania ben Yechiel as almost a heroic figure. He says, if you look at what Ezra was doing, Ezra was praying. Ezra was overcome with emotion. Ezra wasn't taking action. And Shechania went ahead, and according to the Gemara in Sanhedrin on Daf Yud Aleph Amud Aleph, Machmat Kisufa Avid, what he did was he stepped up to the plate, and so as no one else would have to accept that level of shame and embarrassment, he went ahead and he did this action. He stepped forward and said, I have a plan. We got to do something. Yeah.
It says here that he was certainly not among them.
Well, it's good that it says,
but what you just
right, according to that approach, he wasn't among them, but there is another way of saying that he was among them, and he may have taken the piece. Now, what's fascinating on all of this is it goes back to something that we also see about Ezra himself, and we'll see this in the parak. And what we see in this parak, I don't know if you're looking for it. Okay, what we see in this parak is actually something that is mentioned by Rav Heber from Amale Dumim, and I saw it elsewhere as well in modern commentaries. They say that Ezra in this figure is a passive figure. It's not that he's not doing anything, but he's not taking real social action. He's taking religious action. He prays and he cries, and we're going to see he's fasting, and we're going to see he's spending time inside of the Beit HaMikdash. Okay, but he isn't going ahead and rallying the troops and trying to bring about some legislation to make a difference of that nature. All that's happening right now is Shechania steps up, and Shechania takes the bull by the horns, and he says, Vayomer leEzra, and he tells to Ezra, Anachnu ma'alnu ve'elokeinu. We have sinned to our God. we have rebelled, we have crossed these boundaries, that ultimately this is an issue that has to be resolved. There were, at the end of the day, we'll see at the end of the parak, there are 113 families in which there were intermarriage who divorced their wives or sent their wives away. And he seems to be, the Malbim seems to be suggesting Shechania is one of the leaders of the Jewish people. Again, whether he was one who had intermarried or not, we don't know for sure. Okay, but ultimately, that if you look at what's happening here, Shechania is taking the action. He says, we've done this. Then we have brought in these foreign women from the people of the land. He says, even though we did all of this, there is hope. Now, yesh mikveh, the Mitzudat David says, is the same as yesh tikva. There's hope. There's hope. What's the hope? The hope is we'll be able to undo this horrific sin that we've committed against God. By getting rid of these intermarried couples, by telling the non-Jewish partners goodbye.
It's interesting that the men are saying they married women. Were there no women who married?
There were women who married men. There were.
It's not mentioned here.
It's not mentioned as well, but part of it is no. Well, no, it's actually not. You're talking about a matrilineal issue. The issue is still the intermarriage. Remember, the intermarriage, there's two issues with intermarriage. One is the question of future of Jewish people. The second is that assimilation that occurs. So women are marrying into non-Jewish homes, and we had that in the previous parak where we mentioned that as well. Most likely what's happening here is one, is the men are generally the public figures. Number two, what you also have on this is that it comes down to the fact that you also have these women, if they were in the non-Jewish male homes, they probably weren't fully part of the Jewish people at that point. They were probably more governed by what's going on by the non-Jews, what's going on in that foreign culture than in this culture. So why they're not stepping forward? I think the easiest answer is they were, in that case, they weren't the leadership. They weren't going to be taking these public positions. But he says, ultimately, we have done all of this. Rashi says that the hope is not, we're not necessarily talking about a hope that we'll be able to fix the sin or to undo the sin. What he's saying is we have hope that we'll be able to fix the situation. We will make sure that things get, that these separations occur. The Ibn Ezra says, no, that actually this is a rhetorical question where he says, Yesh mikvel Yisrael al-zot. He says, such a horrific thing has happened. Is there any hope that we can ever imagine? Ve'ata, and therefore, Shechania suggests, Nichrot brit lelokenu. Let's enter into a covenant. להוציא כל נשים והנולד מהם בעצת אדוני, ובחרדים במצוות אלוקינו וכתורה יעשה. That we're going to put aside all we're going to send away all of the non-Jews who have married into us, as God wants. Be'atzat is like ke'atzat, like the suggestion. B'mitzvat Elokeinu, Rashi says that it'll be that those who are faithful will send them off. Okay, the Mitzudot David says actually it will be done with a sense of zealousness for this to happen. The Torah, we're going to do all of these things. Then we'll be able to worship Torah. The Malbim says, no, then we will have the power of religion on our side if someone doesn't do this for punishment. Now, what's interesting in all of this is, again, Shechania is coming up with this plan, not Ezra. Shechania's plan is to create a covenant, a brit. So a lot of people point to the fact that if you remember the Gemara, when we first started talking about Ezra, that the Gemara says that Ezra b'doro, that in Ezra's time, he was like Moshe Rabbeinu. Okay, in many ways, Ezra revitalized, reintroduced Torah to the people. All of his enactments that we'll learn about later that he did, he began this major process, but really took the building the Beit HaMikdash to the next step. And so a lot of people point to the fact that, whoa, Ezra's creating a brit, a covenant. Moshe had a brit. There was Brit Sinai, the covenant of Sinai, the covenant of Arvot Moab, right before they went into Eretz Yisrael, the covenant, if you remember, of Harival and Har Grizim. This was a concept of brit. And therefore, you see again this parallel. What's interesting, the Malbim is saying that this brit is very utilitarian nature, because Ezra's only power at this point was a religious power. Once you enter into a covenant to do something, basically what the people are doing is they're legislating action that this should be law. And this actually added to the power that if someone was going to hesitate of sending away the non-Jews, there would be now legislative action that everyone signed on to as a covenant. Everyone signs on to it. You don't do it now, you can get in trouble. You're actually buttressing the case that Ezra will be able to have to support it.
But isn't it more like a netter than a covenant?
Well, it says brit. No, it says a brit. A brit is a covenant.
Means like Hashem agreed to it.
A covenant is a two-sided action that is, a covenant means there's a two-sided action. It's contract. Okay, there's a contract, yeah.
When all these people left, are these the Sumerians, the remainder?
Samaritans are not even these people. We're talking about the people who have come back to Eretz Yisrael from the time of Zerubbabel until now. Who had begun to intermarry, yeah.
So who is the Sumerians?
The Samaritans. The Samaritans were at this time, remember their status, they are being rejected. We'll see this as soon as we get into Nehemiah. They're being rejected as not legitimate members of the Jewish people. Okay, Ezra and Nehemiah are not going to let them be involved in building the Beit HaMikdash. We'll get to them in a little bit.
Where are they from? Who are they?
They were, if you remember, when Sancheriv came and exiled the 10 tribes, he was, and the Babylonians after him, were the Assyrians and the Babylonians practiced population exchange.
Right.
And part of the process of population exchange is you repopulate a land with a foreign people. That way they don't have that sense of home and you're able to rule over them much easier. The Gerei Arayot, the Samaritans, were people who came and they were being attacked by wild animals, including lions. And so what they chose to do is they chose to worship the God of their place. The God of their place happened to be God with capital G. They're called Gerei Arayot because the lions were the motivation for their conversion. There is a debate going through the time of the Tanaim of their status. Do we accept them as Jews or not accept them as Jews? And what we see in Ezra and Nehemiah, they rejected them as the people to be involved in the building of the Beit HaMikdash, which created a very big challenge for us. Okay, Samaritans in modern language, we talk about a good Samaritan actually from the New Testament was somebody who was anti-Jewish. It's actually not a good thing for a Jew to be a good Samaritan. Okay, in a lot of different levels. Okay, it's good to be a good person and to help other people, but to be identified as a good Samaritan is problematic. So Shechania, he goes ahead, he steps up to the plate. That begins in Pasuk Bet, Pasuk Gimel. He suggests this covenant, and then he says, "Kum ki alecha hadavar v'anachnu imach chazak ve'aseh." And he tells Ezra, "Okay, make it happen. You have that responsibility, but not only do you have that responsibility, it says that Mikra, remember, you have all the government authorizations. You had all of these permissions. But if you think about what we said earlier about Ezra as a religious figure, Shechania was one of the leaders of the Jewish people. He says, okay, Ezra, let's get going. It's not that Ezra is saying this on himself. Ezra's response is to pray. Ezra's response is to fast. Ezra, on this response, it seems to be as if he really needs somebody to push him in this process. Other Meforshim say no, that Shechania stepped up to the plate because Ezra is on one side. He is the sacred figure, the religious leader, and you needed somebody from those people about who this action is going to have an impact to say, okay, we're going to do this. And so it may not be that Ezra was a passive kind of figure. It may be that this was all the plan of Ezra. We don't know for sure again, but ultimately it says, Anachnu imach, he says, we're going to go along with you. Chazak v'yaseh vayakom Ezra. So Ezra got up. Shchai told him to get up. He got up. Vayishba et sarei hakohanim haLeviim v'chol Yisrael, and he went ahead, as will Nehemiah do in Perek Hay. He had all of them take an oath. The leadership, leadership of the Kohanim, the Levim, and the Israel, asod kadavar hazeh vayishaveu, and they took the oath. Vayakom Ezra milifnei Beit Elokim. Now Ezra got up again, but this is physically getting up, and he left the Beit HaMikdash. Vayelech el lishkat Yehochanan ben Eliashiv, and he went over to the offices of Yehochanan ben Eliashiv. Yehoyachan is the grandson of the Kohen Gadol. It's Yehoyachan ben Eliashiv ben Yoyakim, and he goes from the Beit HaMikdash there. Vayelech sham lechem lo achalu ma'im lo shatan. He hadn't eaten or had anything to drink yet. Kimit abel al mal hagolah, because he's still mourning over what has happened. Now, again, those who want to find the comparisons with Moshe Rabbeinu, lechem lo achalti, ma'im lo shatiti. Moshe Rabbeinu, when he's 40 days and 40 nights on Har Sinai, has not had anything to eat or drink. Here, Ezra, when this brit is taking place, has not eaten and not had anything to drink. But there's a major difference, and that is the reason Moshe Rabbeinu did not eat or drink on Sinai is he's like a malach. He's angelic in a sense. He is purely spiritual for those 40 days and 40 nights. Here, the reason why Ezra is not eating and drinking is he's fasting because he's in mourning. The pasuk says very simply, "Kimit abel al mal hagolah." So there's some parallel, but it's not a real similar situation. Vayaviru kol biyudav Yerushalayim. But now, amazing thing happens, and that is there's an announcement made. Rashi says, "Chuz." There's an announcement made in Yehuda and Yerushalayim, where the Jews were living in the modern time of Judea. L'chol bnei hagolah, to all of the Jews who had come back from the diaspora, likavetz Yerushalayim, to get to Yerushalayim. V'chol asher lo yavo l'shloshet hayamim katzat hasarim v'azkenim. And anyone, and there's a thread here, anyone who doesn't show up within these 3 days, Yecharem kol rechusho, he will lose all of his property. His property will be nationalized, will be taken from him. He'll be put into excommunication. The Gemara in Yevamot says this, by the way, is where we learn the principle of Hefker, Beit Din, Hefker. Beit Din has the power to remove ownership of someone's property. This is what's happening here. They say, you don't follow us, anything you own, all of your assets will no longer be yours. The court is going to take them. Hefker, Beit Din, Hefker? It can be done in many, many different ways. You know, the Beit Din can make a decree, and they can just take away a person's property if he's not doing certain things. We find Hefker, Beit Din, Hefker in aspects of halacha, but really they have that absolute power over someone else's assets. We don't use it nowadays because they don't have the power to enforce it. But it was used. Yeah. Beit Din doesn't have that legislative power either in Israel. Okay, it's not today. So, but what?
Has the thought of conversion entered Ezra's mind?
No, the conversion was not an option. The conversion was not an option. But by the way, it's not a pure conversion. These people were married, if you remember. They were together. It's not a halachic marriage. You can't have, as I mentioned last week, you can't have a halachic marriage with a non-Jew. So the concept, the only English word we have is intermarriage, and from that you have nisuei tarovet, which is also means a mixed marriage. But the reality is, from a halachic perspective, it's just promiscuity. There's no such thing as marriage to a non-Jew. The only situation of marriage is with a Jew. So the conversion for the purpose of marriage is also a questionable conversion. And we'll see at other points, there are times where conversions weren't necessarily permitted. But to move on to this, what happens is, v'chol asher lo yavo l'shloshet yamim pasuk chet, ka'atzat hasrim v'azkenim, yecharem kol rechusho v'hu yibadel mikal hagolah. So there's a pretty strong threat to go along with it. Vayikavtzu kol anshe Yehuda u'Binyamin Yerushalayim l'shloshet yamim. So all of the people actually made it. Now this is amazing. You have everybody shows up. There was a pretty good threat, but they believed the threat. It was the 20th day of Kislev. And they all deposited themselves. They were all sitting in the courtyard outside of the Beit HaMikdash. Now, it's interesting, the Rambam points out, how do we know it was outside the Beit HaMikdash? Because you're not allowed to sit in the Beit HaMikdash. The only person who sat in the Beit HaMikdash was the king. So it says Vayeshvu, and it says, ultimately, Berchov Beit Elokim, it must be outside in the courtyard. Nowadays we have in modern Hebrew, Rechovot, is, Berchovot Ha'ir. So it's the courtyards, the large areas of the city. Mar'idim ala devarim, and they were scared. They were shaking over this issue. Umehag Shamim, and also because of the rain. Very strange comment. The people come, they're scared of what's ahead of them, and they're really scared of the rain. Must have been a downpour. But you know what? It's a rainy season, right? It's the rainy season. But if you think about it for a minute, it's like, I'm really scared of what's going to happen to me, and I'm really uncomfortable because it's cold here also. It's like it's a strange combination of things, and it suggests that as much as they had bought into this idea that they were in trouble, they weren't 100% there. There were other external concerns that they had that made no sense and didn't seem to work. Vayakom Ezra Kohen, Ezra gets up, Vayomer Alehem, and he says, Atem ma'altem. You went ahead and you have violated, you have sinned. V'toshivu nashim nochriot. You have went ahead and you brought into your homes these foreign women. Lohosif al Ashmat Yisrael. And what you have done is actually you have added to the sins of the Jewish people, which we had suffered before the Beit HaMikdash. What you're doing is compounding the sins. V'atam. Tnu toda laHashem Elokei avotechem v'asu ritzono. And now, tnu toda, admit your sins. Toda from the terminology of vidui. Or, as the Sudat David says, Eyu modim asher asitem aram. Admit to your guilt, to the evil you've done, and then have charata. You have to do tshuva v'hi badlu me'amei haaretz u'min hanashim hanochriot, and separate yourselves. Vayanu kol hakahal vayomru kol gadol ken kidvarcha aleinu lasot. They all said 100%. We're going to do it. We're going to do tshuva. We're going to get rid of these foreign people in our families. Avala amrav. But there's a lot of us here. There's a lot of work to do here. Va'ed kshamim, and it's raining out here. Ve'en koach lamod b'chutz. It's kind of hard to stay outside. And what you're asking of us is not going to be accomplished in one day or two. Because our sins, are pretty big. So we're going to need a little more time than this. Let the leadership stand, maybe let them hang around here. Let them stay in the rain. Let them wait and let them work it out with you. It could be, that's the Malbim's approach. Okay, it could be that we want these people to establish the ultimate court to deal with this. And then everyone will come at the appropriate times. They'll be called before the Beit Din or before these officers, and they'll tell them, okay, here's your time. Prove to us you're getting rid of her. And you'll have the elders and you'll have the judges until everything has been resolved. Okay, that's what can be resolved. Then God will be happier with us. Now, it's a very strange piece. Okay, Ezra, and this is again where Rav Heber comes up with this. Ezra is more in reactive mode than in proactive mode. Shechania created the proactive mode for him. Ezra, they go ahead and they encounter Ezra, And they all agreed, great plan. But let's get inside. I got to change my clothes. I got to take care of it. You see that there is something that is very strange. And Ezra doesn't push it. The Ralbag suggests that Ezra doesn't push it because Ezra is a very smart leader. He knows if he pushes too hard, there'll be a backlash. Because what he is asking of the people is intense. He's asking them to get rid of, to uproot their families, to undo families that have been created. And they said they will. And if he says no, and if Ezra's response to this is no chance, I'm not going to go along with it, what ultimately could happen is they would say, well, then tough, we're not going to go along with you either. So Ezra lets this slide and lets them go along with it, even though we see that this isn't 100%. Yeah, Jim, you had a question?
It talks about wives, it doesn't talk about their children.
Yeah, so the children are included in the prayers and everything else that we have.
So what happens to the non?
Well, if you look in verse 11, it tells you, "He badlumi ameharet, separate yourselves from the people of the land, umina nashim anochriot, and your wives." So that's all inclusive, and specific is the most difficult. Yep. So the pasuk continues with an unusual statement. Ach Yonatan ben Asael v'Achazia ben Tikva amdu al zot. But these two people, Yachziah and Yonatan, they hung out there. Now, what does it mean, amdu al zot? So Rashi says, and there's a position of the Medrash, everyone agreed to it. Of all the people, there were about 50,000 Jews. Everyone bought into it, except for these two. And they were fighting it. They were going against Ezra. The Dat Mikra suggests that those two, and we'll see with their two assistants as well, that when they say Amdu al Zot, that maybe they were the only ones who stuck it out in Yerushalayim. We don't know. Remember, the population's recommendation is let the leadership stay here. It could be, the way I read this, is that Yonatan and Yachziah and also Meshulam and Shabtai, who were Leviim, maybe they were the only four who stuck it out in Yerushalayim and everybody else went back to their hometowns. We don't know for sure. One is the position that those are the only ones who objected, those two plus their assistants. And the other position says, no, those two plus their assistants were the only ones who really stuck by Ezra 100%. Not sure what this means. Vayasu chen b'nei hagolam, and then the Jews went ahead, the people who'd come back from the diaspora, they did what they were supposed to do. They removed their wives from their homes. Vayibadlu Ezra Kohen anashim roshei avot leveit avotam v'chulam b'shemot v'yeshvu b'yom echad l'chodesh asiri l'daryosh hadavar. Okay. Now, what happened was, the Ezra has the Roshei Avot Leveit Avotam, all of them, Chulam B'Shemot, these are all significant people, all of them are important people. Ezra has them taking care of matters. The original position was, let the Sarim do it, right? Here we see, no, the heads of the families managed it. It could be that originally the Sarim were supposed to do it, but then they left, perhaps. And if they left, Ezra didn't give them that power to manage it. So it's the Dat Mikra suggests, no, what really happened was Ezra had to get people who were going to manage this properly, and so he handed it off to a different group than the original group he intended to do. And they went, so about 10 days later, this is Rosh Chodesh Tevet, they already did it, okay, Lidaryosh. Now, it's really, Rashi says, Kamod Lidrosh. They finished, it took them 10 days to have the plan that was necessary. The Ibn Ezra says this is there are four places like this where you have a cholam that is meant as a very, very strong emphasis of the word, like Yasur, Yisrani, Kavo, Kaviti, Varech, Baruch, where the Vav comes in a very, to strengthen the word in such a way. So it should be Lidrosh, Et hadavar took him 10 days. And then, and it says, Vayechalu b'kol anashim hahushivu nashim nochriot ad yom echad lechodesh rishon. And it took then until Rosh Chodesh Nisan that all the people were sent away. Okay, so we start with Kislev, Tevet, Shvat, Adar, Nisan. Okay, so it was 5 months, and so 4.5 months was really this process. 4.5 months was the process. But in that period of time, they were successful to doing it, which is, admirable. It wasn't a simple process, and it wasn't simple for Ezra to make it happen. And now we have the list, and really this is how the parak will end, is the lists of families who separated. Now, in total, we're going to find there are going to be 17 families from Kohanim. There's going to be 10 families from Levium. There's going to be 86 families from the rest of the Jewish people, which is 113, and it's not an awful lot. And we had talked about that this was a lot of people that this had happened with. And so there are a couple of different positions on how you can explain this. One is that 113 is a lot at that time. And Ezra was very successful in what he did. The other possibility is, because we're going to encounter this in Sefer Nehemiah, where they have to do this all over again, Ezra wasn't tremendously successful. There were 113 families who took this really seriously, but there were other families where intermarriages continued even beyond this time. The problem is, it seems, we have these different psukim. If you look in Pasuk Yud Zayin, where it seems to say, B'chol anashim, okay, it happens with everyone. It seems to be all 113. The only problem is saying 100, there are 50,000 Jews and there's 113 intermarriages. Halavai, we had those kind of percentages nowadays, right? So it's a little complicated. It's a little complicated to understand how this plays. And so again, one of those things we're not sure of. And the fact that in Sefer Nehemiah, Perek Hey, when Ezra's still around, they're going to have to do it again, seems to suggest that they were successful, but they weren't fantastically successful. And we have the list. And so the list goes as follows.
Couldn't it be that this is because in English it says among the sons, that it's not a total list, it's just like these are the prominent ones.
It could be. Okay, it could be that these are the prominent ones. We don't see any reason to suggest that there are others. Okay, if you look, Vayachalu, Bakol Hanashim Oshivu Nashim, it's all Vayimatzei Mibnei HaKohanim. Okay, from among the Kohanim, I guess that's how he's going to do it. Asher Oshivu Nashim Nochriot Mibnei Yeshua ben Yotzadak ve'achav Ma'asaya of Eliezer ve'Yariv u'Gdaliah. Okay, that these are the families from the Kohanim. Vayidnu biyadam lotzi neshehem, and they went ahead and they removed the wives. Va'ashemim el tzom al ashmatam, and they actually brought a korban asham. Now, to bring a korban asham, Rashi says it was a horat shah, it was a unique time to bring it. The question is, and the Malbim points out this, that this is an interesting problem, and that's why of why they would bring it, this kind of aisle, this kind of ram, because normally that's over a shogeg versus a mazid. There may have been this misunderstanding whether or not, remember we dealt with it last week, whether or not this kind of relationship was 100% prohibited. It may have been a misunderstanding, and so they were taking, it was a guilt offering, but it wasn't a guilt offering for something that was done in a rebellious manner. Umibnei imer chanani zvadia, uvinei charim ma'aseya va'eliyam ushmaya v'yichiel v'uziyah. Notice here's Yechiel, Shechania ben Yechiel, so he may have been among them. Umibnei pashchur el yo'eni enai, Maaseiah, Yishmael, Netanel, Yozavad, Ve'el Asa. And so you have, these are the 17 families who had intermarried from among the Kohanim themselves. Umina Levim, and among the Levim, there are going to be 10. Yozavad, Veshim'i, Vekelaya, Huklita, Petachia, Yehuda, Eliezer. Okay, notice these names, some of them we know. Here's a Yehuda. right? There's a Yehuda here. We have names that were repeated among the Kohanim. Umina Mishorarim from the choir, El Yashiv, Umina Shorarim from the gatekeepers, Shalom, V'Telem, V'Uri. Those are the 10 families. Now, again, it's not unusual to think that there were fewer Levim. If you remember, there were fewer Levim who came back. Umi Yisrael, from among the rest of the population, Mibnei Parosh, Ramiyah, V'Yiziyah, Umalkiyah, Miyamin, V'Elazar, Umalkiyah, Uvana. These families, Mibnei Elam, Mitatyah, Zechariah, V'Yechiel, V'Avdi, V'Yerimot, V'Eliyah, Umibnei Zatu, Anai, Eliashiv, Matanyah, V'Yerimot, V'Zavad, V'Azizah, Umibnei Bevai, Yochanan, Hananiah, Zabai, Adlai, Umibnei Bani, Meshulam, Maluch, Vadaya, Yashuv, Usha'al, Veramot, Umibnei Pachat Moav, Adna, Uchlal, Benayam, Asayam, Matanya, Betzalel, Vinui, Ben Hashem, and Posuk Lamed Aleph. I know this is fascinating. Umibnei Charim, Eliezer, Yeshiyah, Malkiyah, Shemaya, Shimon, Binyamin, Maluch, Shmaryam, Umibnei Chashum, Matnai, Matata, Zavad, Elifelet, Yeremai, Menashe, Shim'i, Mibnei Vani, Ma'adai, Amram, V'Uel, Benayam, Bedia, Kulhu, Benaya, Miremot, Eliashiv, Netanya, Matanai, Ve'asai, V'nei V'nui, Shim'i, V'Shalemaya, V'Natan, V'Adaya, Machnedavai, Shashai, Sharai, Azrael, V'Shalemayu, Shmarya, Shalom, Amarya, Yosef, Mibnei Nevo, Yeiel, Matitya, Zavad, Zvina, Yadai, V'Yoel, Benayah. Posuk Mem Dalid. Now comes. No, but by the way, it's interesting how many names we don't use anymore.
Especially this one, especially the Kohanim.
What? Yeah, but that's because we play on his name. Yeah. Kol Eile Nisiena. I'm sorry. Kol Eile Nasu Nashim Nochriot. All of them had married foreign wives. V'yesh mehem nashim v'yasimu banim. And there were among them women who also had their sons. Okay, there were some were just women that had to be sent away, and some had children who had to be sent away at the very same place. And interesting, the Malbim points out, notice the verb for banim, vayasimu banim. They were placed. Normally, lasim is to put. What would we normally say if you had children? Yaldu, right? Yaldu, okay. Okay, that they gave birth, right? From the word yaled. So the Malbim points out that specifically this verb appears because of the halacha, that this foreign woman has a child. Biologically, it's the Jewish man's child. Religiously, he has nothing to do with that kid. Religiously, it's totally her kid, and therefore it uses the word, in this case, vayasimu. It's like he's just there. He was put there and nothing else. And so where we're at the end of Ezra is in a fascinating place. At the end of Ezra, Ezra has begun a process. But he really hasn't accomplished everything that needs to be accomplished. There's still a lot that has to take place. And as a result of that, we're going to pick up on Nehemiah. Nehemiah is going to really make things come together, and they're going to be this team. Nehemiah is going to be a skilled politician. Ezra is going to be a skilled religious leader. The two together, one more time, comes up with, we had this beautiful connection between Moshe and Aaron, the same kind of partnership that existed. Even though here we say that Ezra is more of the Moshe role and Nehemiah is going to be more of the political role within it. But we'll see how that plays out the next time we get together, which is going to be in about 5 weeks. The Sunday after Tisha B'Av, we'll start Sefer Nehemiah. And everyone should have a wonderful day. And thank you very much. And Hadron Alach Sefer Ezra.
I have a question for you.